Hello from Nicky and from me from Castle Goring. Well, we have quite a lot of ground to cover today, some rather more controversial than others, and I do hope that I'm not going to antagonize too many people with my forthright and well-considered comments, but we will start off with rather lighter and less controversial matters before plunging in to the really rather difficult, trying, and quite frankly, yes, baby girl, yes, odious matters that we are going to have to discuss because they are topical and relevant. So, if I may, without further ado, I will plunge right in. April Moon says, and now, can we do a good taste award? And I think that's a brilliant idea. And if you would like for us to do a good taste award, may I suggest that you say that you'd like it and I will get to work on it. JB says, Catherine's 40th birthday pictures are a glaring contrast to Meghan's 40th video, where they mocked British customs, tea, ladies' hats, etc., and Harry juggling. Kate is ready to be a queen, but Meghan looks ready to be back on a cable TV show. She demonstrates no dignity, let alone class. Do I agree? My dear, it wouldn't be possible to disagree. To use the American vernacular, Catherine is a class act, and Meghan is a scrubber trying to pose as someone who I don't even want to say it. Yes, I do. I do. I do. Meghan is a scrubber trying to pose as a lady. She's a lady. And she's so pretentious and so precious and so everything. And she just reeks insincerity and pretentiousness. And dare I say that ghastly word, classlessness. I absolutely loathe the word. But since it's appropriate to this question, I will use it. SPS says, I have not seen any official congratulations from the Sussexes. The Cambridges and other royal family did send their congrats when old Meg turned 40. Where are your manners, Harry? You and Catherine were best of friends, and she always supported you. Yes, she did. She was a sister, according to him, that he'd never had. Well, you know, they say a week is a long time in politics, but an hour is an awfully long time in bed with a grande horizontale. And the fact of the matter is that somebody who is adept at playing on masculine wiles will lead the man to believe that he's a leader when he's being led. I think that gets the message across, don't you? There are problems, big problems behind the scenes. And I think people are trying to address them in as constructive a manner as possible. But I'm afraid destructiveness and constructiveness are not easy bedfellows. And I suspect that ultimately destructiveness is going to win out over constructiveness. But we will see. But it's very telling that there were no congratulations. Very. Johannes Balls says, I will not give Archewell the clicks, so this could be incorrect. But what a gracious gesture it would be to simply post Happy 40th birthday to Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cambridge from Harry and Meghan. We love you on the landing page. To not post something in that fashion is simply bad manners. Yes, it is. But it's also indicative of the reality. And the reality is that there are very choppy seas at the moment. Chloe Ann says, isn't it interesting that so far there is complete silence from Montecito on the release of Catherine's portrait? They usually release something to outshine whatever comes from the Cambridges. Well, there wasn't complete silence. There might have been complete silence from Montecito, but there wasn't complete silence from the Sussexes supporters, who were actually hard at work laying the ground so that they would put a load of banana skins down in the path of the Cambridges so that they would trip and skid and scatter all over and then land up in the red herrings that they have also been scattering all about the place. So, silence isn't always golden. SPS says, the Sussex squad was out with special force on Catherine's birthday in the press media comments, ridiculing the wonderful photos. It was so silly, claiming that Catherine looked older than old Meg. They really are desperate. Yes, but you know, they are paid good money and they need to earn their money. I mean, they're paid, as those of you who know, there were complaints the other day that their money hadn't come as quickly as it ought to, and they made demands. So there's proof that some of these people are paid. And what can I say? You earn your money. You earn your money. I think there are some despicable ways of earning money, and I would have thought targeting perfectly innocent and decent people is one of them. However, I suppose it's a little bit better to steal somebody's reputation than to steal their property, I suppose. So I'm trying to be nice about people who earn money in such despicable ways. I'm struggling, but I'm trying. Susan 1962 says, the duo didn't even wish Duchess Catherine a happy birthday, but wrote an entire long paragraph about the late Desmond Tutu. Then their PR came out and said that they much preferred having a Zoom call with her. Highly doubt there was any Zoom call, where Meghan can reiterate how she forgave Catherine for making her cry. Things are very, very bad in Montecito, she thinks, and I agree. Things are very, very bad in Montecito. You know, Meghan has a lot of grouses, and she considers them all absolutely justifiable. Catherine made me cry. Yes, Catherine made me cry. Mickey, come and console Motty. She's crying on behalf of Megsie baby. Catherine made Megsie baby cry. What about Charlotte? What about Charlotte, who was reduced to tears, age 3? I don't suppose that counts. She's just a 3-year-old child and a princess, so why would she count? Meg's baby is the one who rarely counts. In fact, Meg's baby is the one who only ever counts. When you're that deluded as she appears to be, and when you're that full of venom as she appears to be, if her conduct is anything to go by, you're dealing with a very, very disturbed individual. And disturbed individuals disturb others. That's what they do. They disturb others. Jamie Butler says, Lady C, I am halfway through your Life is Worth Living. Actually, Jamie Butler, I think it's called A Life Worth Living, but I get what you mean. Memoir and another story from your friend would be fab. I take it you mean Mark. Yes, I'm going to ask him to come and tell us all about my parents-in-law and their very public fight in one of the chicest nightclubs on earth at the time. Fascinating, insightful and relatable people. Oh, thank you. Also, is this the beginning of the end for Meg and Harry and their PR boat they're sailing in? I mean, all that is false is transient. All that is true remains, yes? Regrettably, my dear, I can't agree. Many a truth has sunk like a stone, and many a lie has floated on the sea of inexactitude, shall we say, the way a turd floats on the sea. But having said that, there are big problems in Montecito, as I have said. And let us see what the denouement is, or if they will be able to surmount the difficulties that are facing them. Because some of what's going on is really not very pretty. KWI says, Meghan is using American media to belittle and bully Catherine. I saw a news story, news is in inverted commas, comparing what Catherine did versus what supposedly Meghan did on their birthdays. The story said all Catherine did was to pose for a photo shoot while Meghan worked on her charities. It showed a picture of Catherine in a red gown and me in all white at a desk working. How dumb do these media outlets think we are? The pics of Meghan were clearly posed and required every bit, if not more, preparation than Catherine's. All propaganda. Well, I'm glad to see that people see through the facade and really to the complete nonsense that is going on. You know, competitive people are so boring, I have to tell you. I'm just glad I'm not competitive. They are so dull and boring. It's always the same old rubbish. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to top you. I'm going to this. I'm going to that. No matter what you do, I'm going to do better. Even if I do worse, I'm still going to do better. They are so tiresome. And yes, there is a very nasty subtext to a lot of the press, because there are people out there spreading really vicious and nasty rumours about Catherine. And there are also people spreading nasty rumours about Catherine and William. And there are also nasty people out there willfully belittling Catherine in the attempt to boost Meghan. Now, do we seriously think that this is all accidental? Especially after all the leaks that there were the other day about we need our $1,000 or whatever it was that they were saying they hadn't been paid on time. B. Blom says, "Greetings, Lady C. There are rumours about Princess Eugenie leaking information to Montecito, and for that reason now being in trouble with the rest of the royal family. She is apparently also rowing with her sister Princess Beatrice. Do you know anything about the veracity of these rumours by any chance?" Well, I know what I'm being told, and I know what people are complaining about, and I know what people are saying. There are two strings to this fiddle. The first one is identification. The Yorks en famille identify with the Sussexes because they are both second stringers. They are also both outsiders now. The problems really started with Sarah York's separation when she was completely made an outsider and maintained her outsider status for the next nearly 30 years. This had an impact upon the girls and upon the status of the York family generally, because they were virtually second-class royals. Harry and Meghan have joined the second-class club, or, to not mix the metaphors too much, the second stringers club. It's not a club, the second stringers instrument. That's one aspect to what's going on. So there is identification. And when people feel that they have been excluded and that they are déclassés and that they're not really welcome at the top table, and even if they're asked to the banquet, they're placed beneath the salt, so to speak. They have chips on their shoulders, sometimes with justification, sometimes without. But this is one of the reasons, incidentally, why I have always been dead against Prince Charles's desire to slim down the monarchy too much, because it breeds dissatisfaction in the family itself. Now, there's always a degree of dissatisfaction in grand families, because the son inherits everything, the eldest son, or not everything, but most things. The second and other sons get smaller portions, as do the daughters. That causes a degree of disaffection right there. I know the old Duke of Gloucester used to complain, as did Princess Alice, Duchess of Gloucester, that they were taken for granted and effectively used by King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, and thereafter sort of not given the attention or the recognition that they felt they deserved. So I want to put this in its context to show that some of the dissatisfaction is actually almost inevitable, because it's not actually inevitable, but it's almost inevitable. I mean, Princess Alexandra's never had a problem. She's been perfectly happy to have her place in the scheme of things, as has the Duke of Kent and the Duchess of Kent. So it's not always inevitable that there's going to be this sort of problem, but it does exist almost as a matter of course. Well, of course, what helps to lessen the sting of being second stringers is that if you're second string on a Stradivarius violin, it's a heck of a lot better than if you're a second string on a banjo. Or if you started out as a Stradivarius and your string is removed and put onto a banjo, which is effectively what Prince Charles has mooted to do with the rest of the royal family. So that right there is a breeding ground for dissatisfaction. What else causes a problem, however, is that Sarah York's behaviour was so completely louche that really she was absolutely unsuited to be included in any close way. That meant that her daughters and her husband, their position slightly suffered as well. So some of the blame needs to go to Sarah, I've got to tell you. Andrew has not helped matters. Although I also think, in fairness to him, he has been victimised. I think that the press have victimised him all along. This nonsense about Ermal's Andy. Okay, he can be charmless, he can be arrogant, he can be a bit of a jerk, but he has also done sterling work over the decades in terms of trade. And unfortunately, he was perceived to be possibly having his nose in the snout. How fair or unfair that is, I will not go into at this juncture. But he was also denigrated unfairly for being Ermal's Andy. Now, to an extent, he invited some of it, but much of it he didn't invite. The reality is, in terms of the media dynamics, there's the fairy at the top of the Christmas tree, then there are all of the other bad fairies. And number two is usually going to be a bad fairy. This, of course, means that the York girls who wanted to do official duties, and who do sometimes do official duties for their grandmother, have not ever stood a chance of being included in the first rank. So they are going to sympathise with other disaffected people. Welcome Meghan and Harry, and Meghan has played the situation brilliantly. Added to that, is the awareness of the dangers of the conduit from the Yorks directly through to David Boys, who represents Virginia Giuffre. This is a big sticking point. The York girls, well, we're sticking to Eugenie. She has been a friend of Harry and Meghan's, and she's been close to Harry for many, many years. So I get all of that, and I'm not casting any stones in her direction. My understanding is that she's a really sweet girl. However, it hasn't taken a rocket science to figure out that if you are friendly with somebody who is a conduit through to your enemy, you need to be very careful. And there is the fear that Meghan knows how to elicit information from Eugenie, whether this is, and I need to say this for legal reasons, whether this is fair or not, and for legal reasons I need to point out it might not be fair. The perception is that Meghan gets information inadvertently delivered by Eugenie, and she repeats it back, and it compromises Prince Andrew's situation. There is also this fear, and again, for legal reasons, I need to say that this is just a fear, and it might be completely unfounded, but it is an existing fear in certain quarters, that Meghan also uses slips, pauses, and confidences to the detriment of William and Catherine. Do you begin to see the wasp's nest that now exists? It has to be said with a degree of justification. There is suspicion. Because if Meghan hadn't got up on television and told a whole heap of lies about the family on Oprah, and if Harry hadn't then done on television as well. Genetic pain. Mickey, come and help Marty. Marty's got empathetic genetic pain for age. You see the can of worms? It's a really big problem. Matt the cat says, any comments on Andrew Epstein's saga? I won't call him prince as he doesn't deserve it. It's so interesting, and you're completely ignoring it. Come on, Lady C, not good enough. Well, I suppose I would stand reprimanded if I deserved it. But I don't believe in jumping the gun, Matt the cat. I wasn't going to deal with anything until I knew what I was dealing with. You know, I'm not here to pontificate. I'm here to answer questions realistically. So, I will now answer the question after I've read what A. Robin has to say. Lady C, please can you address the issue of Prince Andrew in a more impartial way than we're getting from others? You have split the notion of the correct label for men who abuse different ages of children, and that is fair enough. Can you now please apply your forensic intellect to the story that Andrew is presenting of himself? He is a royal. How do you think he is doing these days? Well, let me say right now, if Prince Andrew slept with Virginia Giuffre when she was 17 years old, as she has alleged, and let's remember, by her own account, she was paid $15,000 for that encounter. And she told people contemporaneously, including Carolyn Adriano, whom she procured for Epstein when Carolyn Adriano was 14 years old. Let's be very clear about what we're dealing with here. Carolyn Adriano has just given evidence against Ghislaine Maxwell. Her evidence was particularly damning against Virginia Giuffre, and it was not actually at all damning against Ghislaine Maxwell, not at least any part of the accounts that I read, but I'll come to that in a second. She stated very clearly that when she was 14 years old, she was procured by Virginia Giuffre, who was then Roberts, who was over the age of consent. Well, she had to be, because Virginia Roberts didn't meet Jeffrey Epstein until she was 17, which means she was over the age of consent. Now, at this point, I ought to make the point that people get very confused by the difference between a child and a minor. Until fairly recently, the two words were not as interchangeable as they have become recently, because a minor, which now in England, English and American law is a child till they're 18, but you can get married before you're 18. You can have sexual relations before you are 18, once you are over the age of consent. So in England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and in the United States of America, the state, the countries, they allow sexual activity and marriage while you are still a child. This is a very important distinction that needs to be drawn and that people need to bear in mind, because David Boys and Virginia Giuffre are playing absolute havoc for their own ambitions and greed, and whipping up prejudice using words like child, which then people associate with a 4-year-old or even a 14-year-old. Carolyn Adriano was 14 years old when Virginia Roberts procured her. Her testimony in court just recently was that Virginia Giuffre said to her, "Do not tell them how old you are." So she, and according to Carolyn Adriano, she looked 21. Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if Virginia Giuffre told her to make sure under no circumstances did she reveal her age, that Virginia Giuffre is the one who led them to believe she was over the age of consent. Now, if I were a juror, that's the first question I'd ask. If I were a judge, I would be giving the jury's directions on that point. I mean, that is a very important point. Also, another point that came up in the trial was that Ghislaine Maxwell did not procure her. Virginia Roberts did. And all Ghislaine Maxwell did was book a massage, and afterwards, in a completely different part of the house, I'll say to her, "How did it go?" She said, "Fine," or words to that effect. And they booked her another massage. I would have to ask as a juror myself, because if you're putting somebody away for a or even for a few years, you need to ask yourself, you need to be responsible, and you need to be decent, and you need to have a heart, and you need to put yourself in the shoes of the person who is charged. And you need to ask yourself, did this woman really know what was going on? I mean, prejudice and supposition and false assumptions are the way to convict innocent people. That's why in Britain, most good judges ask the jury to consider the difficult questions, such as, did they believe she was over the age of consent? If they believe she was over the age of consent, did Maxwell know what was going on? You can't just say she knew, because she must have known. When you live in big houses, I can tell you something. You cannot see somebody for days or weeks. And also, you don't know what's going on. I have no idea what's going on 3 rooms away from here, ever. It just doesn't happen. I mean, maybe people who don't live in big houses haven't figured that one out, that you're not on top of everything. But judges should be able to figure it out, and judges should be able to tell people that when they are considering the evidence, they need to consider salient points that can lead to reasonable doubt. Now, to get back to the business of Prince Andrew, Judge Louis A. Kaplan, I find deeply disturbing. I'm going to read something out to you before I say why I find him disturbing. That 200 lawyers, 200, not 1 or 2, 200 lawyers filed a judicial complaint against him in 2020, complaining of a shocking violation of the Judicial Code of Conduct and accusing him of targeting unfairly a human rights lawyer who helped the indigenous people in Ecuador win a historic judgment against Chevron, the oil giant. Kaplan repeatedly ruled in favor of Chevron after an Ecuadorian court ordered the company to pay nearly $10 billion in damages after a significant oil spill. The 200 lawyers said, Judge Kaplan has been acting as a de facto lawyer for Chevron in this litigation. That is a very, 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 very serious allegation for one lawyer to make against a judge. And for 200 of them to do it? Well, it certainly says why I had grave reservations about Kaplan's abilities and Kaplan's impartiality and Kaplan's lack of discernment, because the newspaper reports before Kaplan issued his ruling, which is that basically the agreement between Epstein and Giuffre cannot be used by Andrew, and that everything should proceed as if Giuffre were an innocent. Now, Giuffre is not an innocent. Giuffre is, by her own account, a prostitute. It doesn't matter whether Giuffre was a victim of abuse by someone else. She cannot have been a victim of abuse by Epstein because she was over the age of consent when they met. She was living with somebody who was charged with sex crimes long before she met Epstein. Now, I'm not saying that I don't have a degree of sympathy for Giuffre as a young girl on drugs, wild, causing terrible problems for her parents and her family. But this is somebody who is deeply suspect. Yet Judge Kaplan acts as if she is cleaner than the freshly driven snow. And he says that he can't see that the word potential defendant, that potential has any significance in the agreement and insofar as it applied to the Andrew case. Well, I'm sorry. That agreement, to anybody who speaks English and who isn't unfair, was an agreement that she entered into that absolved him and everybody else from further legal action. Any potential defendant is what the agreement said. Potential defendant. You have to be really dumb or crooked or prejudiced to not understand that potential defendant means potential defendant. It doesn't mean anything else. But Kaplan made it quite clear he was going to make it into something else because he couldn't understand the meaning of the word potential. No, poor man. He should have tried looking it up in a dictionary. Well, Kaplan has, I have to tell you, a shocking record. in terms of failing to understand what his duties as a judge are. There is a case that goes back to the Guantanamo Bay Al-Qaeda people. Someone called Ahmed Galani. He was the first person from Guantanamo Bay to receive a civilian trial. His lawyers, now I have no brief for terrorists, I have to tell you. I think they are terrible people, and I think that there are certain times when the death penalty is called for, and in certain incidents of terrorism, I would not be averse to the death penalty being used. So I have no brief for terrorists, nor indeed do I have any brief for wrongdoers, full stop. But it doesn't alter the fact that when this man was being tried by Kaplan, Kaplan's conduct was so denying the man of any of his human rights. You know, even guilty people have rights. Everybody has rights. If you believe in the law and you believe in justice, justice and the law are there to protect all of us, even the guilty. It's not enough that the innocent be protected. The guilty need to be protected as well. They need to pay the price, but they need to be protected. This man's statement was unbelievable. He said the horrific nature of the attacks far outweighed, and wait for it, quote unquote, any and all considerations that have been advanced on behalf of the defendant. He seems to have not understood that it was his duty as a judge to consider the fact that even if the man's actions outweighed, that he still had rights that he, Kaplan, was supposed to respect and didn't. Now, I have to say, you know, it's simply not sound legal or ethical practice for a judge to decide, I don't like the defendant and therefore I'm just going to deprive him of his rights. That's not how justice is supposed to work. What also makes this situation deeply disturbing to anybody with any knowledge of the law and any appreciation of why justice is necessary and why the law should aim to be just, even to those who are odious. If Kaplan can't stretch to the enormity of his responsibilities, he shouldn't be on the bench. I make that point for what it's worth. You know, not only has he acted as if Prince Andrew, who's never been charged with or found guilty of a crime, should be deserving of the harshest interpretation, while Virginia Giuffre, who should have been charged with many a crime and so far hasn't, even though she is a self-confessed perjurer, prostitute and procuress. I mean, where is the balance here? Could the balance lie in the fact that Kaplan was appointed by Clinton Now, I have to tell you, I'm something of an admirer of Clinton. I know some of you are horrified by that notion, but I am something of an admirer of President Clinton when he was president. Maybe I don't understand American politics, maybe I'm misguided, but this has been my failing, shall we say, to those who don't agree with me. But this is my position. Nevertheless, it doesn't alter the fact that everybody knows that President Clinton has spent his whole life with his zip down. Remember Monica Lewinsky, to just name one? Remember the impeachment? And what does and mean, or was it so? And disputing for 20 minutes the meaning of the word and or so. I don't remember which one it was, but it was something as simple as that. I mean, a lawyer, yeah, and I actually thought he shouldn't have been impeached. I have to tell you, certainly not for that. But then I take a very European view of things, you know. I don't really care what somebody does with his business as long as he's not using mine. That's a very European view. I know it's not necessarily a view that the Anglo-Saxon world abides by, but I just say all of this so you know that where I'm coming from on this. Virginia Giuffre is a completely discreditable witness. I'm not going to quote Alan Dershowitz, who made a statement, and he said, as plausible witnesses go, Giuffre is a pretty poor specimen. Although Giuffre was a central figure in the Maxwell case, mentioned repeatedly throughout the trial, she was not called as a government witness. Why was she not called? Because the government could not ethically call her and vouch for her credibility, because they have evidence of her lack of credibility. I gave them the evidence: recordings, travel records, interviews, sworn testimony. Moreover, prosecutors would have to explain why she is not being prosecuted for enticing a 14-year-old to have sex with Epstein. She was an adult who voluntarily brought Carolyn to Epstein, knowing full well what Epstein's intentions were. She was not pressurized or coerced. She did it for money, pursuant to the theory under which Maxwell was convicted. Giuffre is guilty of a felony carrying a long prison term. I'd also like to give you some excerpts from the transcript of the trial, for the testimony of Carolyn Adriano, who was told by Virginia, then Giuffre, Roberts, now Giuffre, that she could make lots of money by giving an older man a massage. She was then driven to the Epstein mansion and taken upstairs to his massage room. The older person who brought her there then, quote unquote, took off her clothes, and she asked me if I would be comfortable taking off mine. Then they both massaged Epstein's back until Epstein turned over. Then the older woman, quote unquote, got on top of him, and they began, quote unquote, having sex, since this is YouTube, in front of the 14-year-old girl. Both Carolyn and the woman who had sex in front of her were then paid in cash. That was how Carolyn was groomed into beginning a several years relationship with Epstein that ended when she was 18. You might be surprised to learn that the woman who was paid to find, bring and groom Carolyn was not Ghislaine Maxwell. although the above testimony was given at Maxwell's trial, the older woman, who was well over the age of consent when she brought the 14-year-old Carolyn Adriano to Epstein, was Virginia Giuffre, the same woman who then falsely accused Adam Dershowitz, Senator George Mitchell, Ambassador Bill Richardson, Prime Minister Ehud Barak, billionaire Leslie Wexner, and many other prominent men of having had sex with her, including Prince Andrew. You know, her own lawyers in the past have disputed much of what she said and acknowledged that she was wrong in accusing various prominent people of having had Congress with her. Her own emails, book transcript, and prior interviews with the FBI contradict her current accusations. With all of that in mind, one has to ask oneself, why would Louis A. Kaplan treat Virginia Giuffre as a rose and Prince Andrew as a thorn? I'll tell you why I think he would. There are stories circulating at a certain level in society that all of this is not only a massive con being perpetrated upon the public to preserve President Clinton, but that the Republicans are allowing it to proceed because they would like to see Clinton discredited. So I'm not saying that any of this is actually accurate. I'm just saying what is floating around at the highest levels of American and British and European society. This is all a massive diversion because they all expect that Prince Andrew will be absolved. And if Prince Andrew is not absolved, the Marxist element in society will take that as a bonus with which to play in further, hopefully, discrediting the British monarchy. I'm not a great believer in conspiracy theories, but it is mighty peculiar that Kaplan is a Clinton appointee, clearly partisan, clearly intent on using his power in a detrimental and destructive and unfair manner. Why? Why? Let us see what happens. But I think the whole thing stinks. And I think Virginia Roberts is an acknowledged liar. If she is an acknowledged liar, maybe she's speaking the truth. But maybe she's not. And even if she is speaking the truth, no crime was committed. Well, no crime in the law, because she was over the age of consent. Any crime would have been a crime of taste or lack of it. But I actually am rather inclined to think that although I wouldn't want to be a prostitute, there are far worse things to be than a prostitute. I can think of one or two. Being a money-grubbing liar who blackmails people and destroys lives and tries to get people put into prison or get millions of dollars off them. I think there are many things worse than being a prostitute, actually. And I think this whole situation stinks to high heaven, and until such time as I have incontrovertible proof that Prince Andrew was guilty. Oh, and incidentally, to those of you who are going to say that the photograph proves that he's guilty, the photograph proves he's innocent. Not only has her aunt corroborated the fact that she sent her proudly a copy of that photograph, but Carolyn Adriano, in her interview, confirmed that this girl proudly showed her the photograph and boasted about having had sex with Prince Andrew. And I don't think anybody who has ever been taken advantage of would be boasting about anything like having somebody take advantage of them. She was proud to have slept with a prince, if indeed she did, because she's such a liar that it's, in my opinion, it's quite possible that she made the whole thing up to boost herself, that she went to dinner with him and that was the end of it. And she simply made the whole thing up. And with the passage of time, she's made more and more and more up. I could be wrong. I could be doing her a grave injustice. But off the evidence of her conduct, I have to tell you, I don't see how I could be making a mistake. You know, in life, we really ultimately have to decide whether we're going to be decent human beings or not. And if we're decent, we do the decent thing. And we give other people the opportunity as well. And we do not indulge in bleeding heart nonsense about, oh, I'm so wonderful that I just feel sorry for everybody who claims to be a victim. I don't feel sorry for everybody who claims to be a victim. I feel sorry for genuine victims. And it looks to me very suspiciously that in this instance, Prince Andrew is the victim. And not only Prince Andrew, the Queen, the British royal family, and the British people, certainly the British monarchists, who, if given half a chance, if they believed he was innocent, would support him. I think they ought to think about this. I really do think people should think about it. I do not for 1 second, having studied this matter, believe a word Virginia Giuffre says. I'm not prejudiced one way or the other. If I felt Prince Andrew were guilty, I would be the first one to throw him under the wheels of a bus. I don't even like Prince Andrew. But it doesn't alter the fact. The man claims he is innocent, and we have the word of a proven liar against somebody who is a war hero, and we're going to believe her because she is supposedly a disadvantaged victim and he is supposedly an overprivileged prince. Excuse me, she came from a very well-off family on her mother's side. She was not somebody who you would say was disadvantaged. She may not have been as privileged as Prince Andrew, but she certainly was not disadvantaged. And there she is playing the poor me card, having made herself millions of dollars. I think the whole thing stinks to high heaven. And I also think that an awful lot of it is malice, envy, greed, and class-driven in the most appallingly unacceptable way. Everybody deserves justice, including a prince, including an odious prince. I do hope that I haven't antagonized too many people, but if I have, what can I say? At least I have examined the subject and I have come to a rational conclusion. And if people disagree with me and they have examined the subject and come to a rational conclusion, that is their right. It's even their right to disagree with me if they have not come to a conclusion rationally. But should that be respected? I don't think so. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and please keep the questions coming in. This can't be done without you. God bless and goodbye.